Okay, so the 462s, sorry, 461s. Well, let's talk about what I originally planned for this next build that I'm going to do on the channel. It's an MS461. It's probably my favorite chainsaw of all time. It's pre-Strato, pre-everything electronic. It's right in the middle of the commercial saw spectrum. There's a couple models smaller, a couple models bigger. It's just a great saw, and they have a lot of potential, and they respond well to porting. So that's the next one that I'm going to do on the channel is this 461. So I'm going to put a really strong work saw build into it, increase the compression ratio, machine work, add a lot of torque, and try to maintain RPM. And so I was thinking, because we've been testing saws by racing stock or equivalent saws, and I'm kind of bored with that. So let's do something completely different this time. Let's build a second 461 and just out of parts and junk that I have laying around. And we'll put orange covers on that one, so there'll be a kind of a clear distinction between the two. And we'll port this one completely different. We'll put big ports in it, big RPMs, a screamer saw, and then we'll try to maintain torque. We'll have to do some things to maintain torque, or otherwise it'll turn into what they call a turd of a saw. We don't want that. So then what we'll do is I'll go test on long bars, short bars, hardwood, softwood, and kind of make a competition out of it and see who can score a point where. And maybe they'll overlap at some point. Maybe they won't. Maybe this saw will just suck. And it'll just be a learning experience. But either way, it'll be fun. And that's all that I do out here is have fun. This is my hobby. I'm not promoting anything or selling anything. So I don't mind sharing the stuff that I build and check out the results. It's just all about having fun and learning. So that's it. Let's get to work. We've got the 461 cylinder and piston work done. So this is where we're at after the chips settled. We've got the black saw with the black covers. That saw, we're going to nickname that one Thunder for fun. And then we've got the orange saw. And that one, we're going to nickname, well, what else? What else would we nickname it? Lightning. Okay, so two inverse builds. Okay, so before we dig into anything any farther, well, why are they inverse? Well, because this one, the black saw, I'm running probably the lowest height exhaust port that I would want to run, and on this one I'm running probably the highest exhaust port that I would want to run. Okay, and then both saws had the same amount of material removed from the base, and so they're both been dropped the same amount. But the black saw had the combustion chamber cut, and the orange saw had the piston cut. So that's how they're inverse of each other. So we're making a lot of torque with this one, and then we're going to try to make a lot of RPM with this one, or an emphasis on. Okay, that's my plan here. So let me preface this by just saying I'm not a professional engine builder. I'm not an engineer. I do this for fun. This is a hobby. And I don't mind sharing this stuff. So it's just all about fun. And I realize that people really just want to see the cutting content. And, you know, that's the most viewed content, is the cutting and the action. But in case anyone wants to see what backs that up, it's here. And I don't mind making this content as long as I have time to do it. I don't mind making this kind of content too. So this is not a how-to channel or an instructional video or anything like that. There's 20 other guys out there that run those types of channels, and some of them are really good at teaching. So this is just for fun. My channel is just for fun. This is a what I do, not a how-to. So the stock, okay, so the black saw we discovered already had port work done to it. And it was mild, but it had exhaust port work done, and it had the lower transfer already somewhat cleaned up and opened up. So that was about it. And then they put some kind of unique features into the intake port, some of these divots here. And some people like to add texture like that to their intake port or whatever, and I don't know exactly what the thought process was behind all that, but it's here to stay now, because I'm not digging all that out. Likewise with the exhaust port, I mean, I gave the exhaust port a quick sand and polish, but whatever's in there, it's already as big as I would want to make the exhaust port. So I'm not digging out any of these other grinder marks, sanding marks, and etc. That just is what it is. And this saw will run great, I'm sure. Well, I hope. So, let's see. Let's talk about the black saw first. The intake, when I got it, was at 71, which is untouched. That's stock. The exhaust was at 101. So a little higher than stock, because he opened up that exhaust port a little bit. Transfers were at 122 because he never touched the upper transfers. So blowdown would have been 21. The way I found it. I can only report the way that I found it. So I believe, so blowdown's here. And then intake to transfer, we should be looking at, for case suction and compression, we should be looking at 51 was our starting point for case suction and compression. If our intake, is that right? I think so. There's lots of numbers here with building two saws and lots of moving parts, and I'm doing this all off of memory, so I just bear with me. Some of this might not be entirely accurate. And after work was done, squish is at 20 thou. So I didn't even measure it before. So intake port, let's talk about how we moved that. So initially, I cut the base and band, right? And that took my intake port to 75. And then after piston work, after port work. So after port work, and that was just sanding it. I gave it a quick sanding, flowed it a little bit on that intake port. Then it just ended up at 76. So that's our journey for the intake port. Exhaust port, so it started off at 101, okay? Then we cut base and band, and it ended up at 105. That's it. 105. So that's it. It's done. Like I said, I just gave it a quick sand and polish. It's at 105. So we've got 150 duration on the exhaust port of open port duration, and then 152 of open port duration on the intake. Transfers were at 122. Okay, so then again, we're in that situation where cut base and band, and that took the transfers to 126. And then after port work was done on the upper transfers, they ended up going back up to 121. So that should be getting me up to about 118 duration. Okay, so blowdown now, when we revise that and look at 105 to 126, I'm sorry, 105 to 121, that puts me at 16. So now my blowdown's at 16 degrees, which is pretty short, but there's been a lot of compression ratio increase in this saw, not only with the machine work, but this saw, I pulled a highway pop-up out of it. So that kind of limits how much I can machine off, because eventually your pop-up I had to taper the pop-up even a little bit just to get it to fit into the squish band that I already had. So you can you can machine more, but you're just going to have to keep tapering and removing. And you might as well just run a different piston. So I'm running the piston that the saw had in it. Highway pop-up. I think it's a highway pop-up. Yes, HW, highway pop-up. So that's it. I mean, there's really not a lot that I did to this besides drop the cylinder 4 degrees and raise the transfers back up. So let's talk about the transfers, because I feel like the transfers are always kind of that part of the build that you just, it's kind of the more complicated part, but the most important part. So this is going to be hard to do with the camera like this, but let me grab the pencil. So on the exhaust port side, we've got the main or the primary transfer. Okay, so what I did was I ground that up to 121, but then I made it flat across the top with a flat roof, discharging over the top center of the piston. And then on the secondary, I kept it in kind of that stock tapered up shape, and even gave the roof of this port a little taper up, because we want to, this port, I want to try to treat it like a boost port. So this one's gonna dump at 121, and then I want to give lift to that incoming charge with the secondary. So the stock shape on these transfers is kind of a V shape. So, oh, my black marker just puked out on me. The fun of trying to make content. Okay, so I had to steal this whiteboard from my kid because I knew there was going to be so much writing for this. So as this cylinder sits right here, we've got our exhaust port, right, coming out right here. And I've got a main or a primary transfer that's kind of tapered. It's cut, these transfers are kind of in a V shape, and this is very accentuated. This very exaggerated. Okay, so there's kind of like this power V going on here. And this saw employs a feature called delayed scavenging. What is delayed scavenging? I have no idea. I don't want to talk about delayed scavenging. So what I did to try to get this thing to flow fast and hard is I ground this, because remember, we're in that position again where we're covering up. Here's the piston at bottom dead center. Okay, so we're eclipsing the bottom of the transfers again a little bit. So not only do I want to make up for that, but I've increased the compression ratio drastically, significantly. So I should be pushing my exhaust out with a lot of velocity. And I'm not making more RPM with this saw. I have 105. I have a lower exhaust than stock. So I don't think that I need a ton of blowdown for this. Okay. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking this transfer back from 126 up to 121 and then grinding this port flat across the top so we can get a big dump right at 121. And then the secondary is still going to have that upward kind of, it got raised, but it's still going to kind of have that upward tilt to it and a little bit of taper on the roof, because I want to push when this comes in over the center of the piston. I want this secondary to push and make my loop scavenge. So that's it. That's it. I don't think it's necessarily overcomplicated. It works on the whiteboard. It works in my head. This is why we test this stuff. Then this is why I show you what I'm doing. So then I'll go put it in the wood and we'll decide, is it any good? Does it work? As far as port shaping, I gave a little size to the intake. Like I said, the exhaust port was done. All I did was I had to put a chamfer on it because there was no chamfering on the exhaust port. And I gave it a quick sand and polish just to smooth out whatever I could. Lower transfers were done, and he transitioned the cases into the lower transfer because they got opened up a little bit. So that's all good. That's the build. Done. Now, for the orange saw, there's a lot more going on here with the orange saw. So I think, like I said, the machine, it took the same amount off the base. We lowered the cylinder 4 degrees. And then I cut that amount right back off this piston. I think I took something like 20 grams of weight off this piston by doing that. So the intake is fairly simple. The intake went from 71, that's our stock height on the intake, giving and that should be about I think 142 duration. And then after cutting base and band, after cutting the base, just cutting the base, that took that 71 to 75. Okay. And then after after port work and piston work, so we'll call it port and piston work, it went to 80. Okay, because I'm doing some other things that are going to add flow, and I'm going to maximize flow before I add more intake time. So that puts my duration at 160 now on the intake. So, and I'll talk more about the overall plan and how I'm going to try to add flow to the intake before I add more time. We can always add more time to the port. It's harder to put time back in once you've taken it out. But okay, so, and when I say I did piston and port work, what I mean is I went and I opened up this port a little bit, did some cleanup work, added some double barrels on the side, and then removed some degrees off of the bottom of the piston skirt. So if we need to, we can always put some back in by changing the piston instead of having to try to glue up the intake port. So the exhaust, that's the story on the intake port. Exhaust started at 102 again because it's a stock unmolested cylinder. Not anymore. We can't say that. Okay, so that should have put us at 156 open port duration on the exhaust. And then after cutting the base, that would have put my exhaust at 106 when we lowered it down 4 degrees. Now my orange pen's dying. Awesome. And then after piston work, because remember I coped the top of the piston to the curvature of the stock squish band. So that puts me at, and I removed the same amount of material off the top as I did the bottom, off here as I did here. So that puts my exhaust port at back to 102 automatically. And then after grinding the exhaust port up and shaping it, it went to 98. So after port work, it went to 98. Okay, so that now is putting my duration on the open port duration on the exhaust port up to 164. Okay, now transfers. Well, let's look at the exhaust port. Exhaust port got a little width and got a quick sand and polish, nothing crazy. And then of course chamfer on the inside edge. These are a little easier to port because there's a wear mark kind of on the sides. There's piston wear. You can see that line, and that's an indicator of where your piston skirt is. So you can kind of extrapolate that line up and keep your exhaust port, whatever you want it to be, 2 millimeters or whatever, off of that piston skirt edge. Transfers. Okay, so same story as the exhaust port. The transfer started at 122. So I believe that should have been a 116 duration. after cutting the base, the transfers went to 126. Okay, then after, we'll just say after port work and piston work, because there was a little bit of cleanup work done to the transfers, a little shaping, but I didn't grind them up. I did not really grind them up intentionally. But between the top of the piston being cut and the transfers being cleaned up, then they ended up at, I think, 121. So they're the same height as the black saw. Yeah. Yeah, because they went back up 4 degrees with this, and then with cleanup work and shaping on those transfers, they went up about another degree. So now we're at 121 on the finished transfers. Okay, so that's putting my duration at 118. So not much more than stock, and we'll talk about that. So that puts my blowdown at, so when I connect these two, that puts my blowdown at, well, it started at 20. Let's note that. It started at 20. Come on, pen. Come on. You got a couple more numbers in you, pen. And then it went to 23. So it went to 23. So we're running longer blowdown. And the case suction and compression started at, so if we connect these, case suction and compression, what would that be? 51 again? Same as the other. Oh, I never filled that number in over here. 51. I apologize if you can't read that. The pen's dying. So case suction and compression, I got to fill that in over here. This one went from 51 to, because of the work done to the upper transfers, and a little bit of cleanup work on the intake port, I think that was 6 degrees reduced. I believe that puts me at 45, which is pretty good. I don't mind at all trading 6 degrees of case suction and compression for more, or for getting my transfers open all the way, first of all, and getting them back to at least that stock duration after cutting, after adding some flow to the intake and cutting the base. I think that's degrees well spent. Now on this saw, on the orange saw, it's going to drop drastically more because of the intake. Because I cut the skirt on this piston and I took the intake down. So now when we connect these two numbers, 80 to 121, that's only 41. So I've lowered my case suction and compression. I can't get this damn pen to work. I've lowered my case suction and compression 10 degrees, which is a lot. And we hope that that's enough and that's well spent. But I hope it is. I think it should be. And the squish on this one is a little greater. It's at 25,000. It's done. that pen's just, it won't write. So this squish now went to 25 thou. And I don't mind putting a little bit bigger squish on if we're going to be increasing piston speed. So let's now talk about the transfers on this. Well, we have a clear bottleneck. We've got we increased our duration on the intake from 142 to 160. We've increased the duration or the open port time on the exhaust from 156 to 164. And the duration on the transfers is relatively the same. So we have a clear bottleneck on the transfers. And if I grind the transfers up, I'm going to take my case suction and compression below 41. I don't want to do that, nor do I want to reduce my blowdown less than 23, because these numbers here are setting me up for being able to run higher operating speed, higher RPM on this build. So if I'm going to increase my operating speed of the saw, I need more of this because the piston's moving faster. So I'll need more of this than stock. So 2 reasons right here why I'm not just going to grind these up and increase the height, raise the height of the transfers. So also, because remember the crown of the piston was cut, I'm not covering those transfers. They're open at bottom dead center. They're open all the way. They're not eclipsed by the piston at bottom dead center. So I have all my transfer open at bottom dead center. The question is at this point, is this duration on those transfers going to serve me and going to get my additional intake and volume up into the combustion chamber in the amount of time that we're going to give it? I would say no, we're not. That's not going to happen. So what I'm going to do, and this is experimental, what I'm going to do is, or what I did was I ground a boost port. So again, flat top on the main. I want my main to dump at 121. And then what I want is to take my secondary and assist that lift or that boost by cutting a boost port in to the leaving side of the secondary transfer. So now I would have loved to have ground that outside and increased my port area, because I still have relatively the same port area. That's another way that I can move more, I could transfer more charge, is by increasing my port area if I'm not going to increase my port time. But I can't do that because I'll hook a ring on the flywheel side if I do that. And I can't just move one bigger, because symmetry is critical. These have to be, these boost ports, we want perfect symmetry on these boost ports, and the way that they're going to shoot and boost and loop scavenge inside that combustion chamber. So the reason why I think this helps is, well, I like to, whenever I do something, I always try to figure out a way, well, how can I do it so that I can kill multiple birds with one stone? So the way that I ground this in, I should be venting, I should be pushing charge through these windows on the piston. Okay, so we should be passing and forcing charge through the windows of the piston and through the side here, but that should assist in cooling the piston, because the 461 inherently, because of a design flaw, it has cooling issues on the piston, which is why they installed a saddle or a deflector inside the intake port. So if I can shortcut, because the stock method is to take my charge from here, intake it into the case, and then have it to go all the way back to the front, and then all the way back up this transfer, and then come out back, and then make its way all the way back again to the back side of the cylinder, which is a very long distance, a very long circuit. This way, I'm short-circuiting that, and I'm gonna when this secondary opens, I'm gonna be back feeding and assisting. So I'll have my case discharging through here, taking the long road, and then I'll also be having it short circuit right out of the intake area and venting through the piston windows and injecting it right up into the secondary port, into the secondary transfer. So now what's the third bird that I can kill with that stone? Let's go look at the saw. So this is the black saw. What do you notice inside that intake port? Well, all I see is this big block blocking the flow of my intake, because this is that deflector that stihl decided to install as a band-aid to their piston cooling issues. So what would happen if I didn't need that anymore? If I could delete that and cool my piston in another way. That's the experimental part. And if it burns up, it burns up. But how much flow are we gonna add to that intake just by doing that alone and mainstreaming that, not deflecting it any longer, and mainstreaming that right in to the case? Will those boost ports cool the piston enough? We will find out. All right, and then the last thing, and then I was going to add about this lightning or this orange saw, is that by taking this saddle out or deflector out, and by grinding these boost ports in, we're adding some pretty good case volume. So by adding 18, I think, degrees of intake duration, I think we're going to want to add some case volume. And of course we did add some in the lowers, but I think when this thing's screaming up top, we're going to want that extra case volume, and so it don't run out of air. That's it. That you know, I don't mind trying some experimental stuff on this saw, because this saw is, I mean, this whole build is just out of a parts box. It's just junk parts that we're going to throw together and try to build a screamer, a toy. I think it'll still make good compression, but I mean, you can see it's got a lot of wear. It's got some wear to it. We're gonna give this thing one last hurrah here, and hopefully it holds up. But I'm gonna throw this saw together. I'm gonna put air tests on both of them, and we'll go do some break-in, take some EGTs possibly, make sure that this one's not cooking, and then I'll do a test video where I'm gonna do a series of tests between these two different bars and stuff like that, and see how they stack up cutting different applications. So that'll be a separate video.